Es un placer para mí ahora presentaros a la speaker más internacional del día de hoy. Ella es la doctora LILIA MANTAI. Es una destacada profesora en la Escuela de Negocios de la Universidad de Sydney y líder académica para la mejora de cursos. Es profesional de la enseñanza superior e investigadora especializada en la elaboración de currículums, competencias académicas y educación doctoral. Además, es miembro senior de Advanced HE, miembro ejecutivo del Consejo Australiano de Investigación de Pregrado y editora asociada a la revista Higher Education Research and Development. Hoy nos va a presentar su investigación recién publicada sobre la progresión de la carrera académica y las habilidades necesarias desde la posición de joven investigador hasta profesor. Así que, whenever you want.
Is it better? Okay. Oh, yeah, that sounds good, right? I can hear me now, myself now. Thank you so much. It was lovely to listen to my introduction in Spanish. Never had that before. Hola y bienvenidos a todos. Es un gran placer estar aquí. Muchas gracias por invitarme. And that's about my Spanish. So I will proceed in English and hopefully everyone online can hear me as well. Please raise your hand if there's anything I need to clarify. Questions from my perspective are allowed at any point, but I'll try to move us through to not impact too much on my next speaker, who will talk about such an important topic like mental well-being, so please stay for that as well. It's so nice to be here, and just wait for my presentation to begin. Fantastic, now we can get going. So, my name is LILIA MANTAI and I'm a senior lecturer at the Sydney University Business School. One thing to know about me, I'm an education researcher, an education scholar, but I'm located in the business school. Today I will be talking to you about careers, career progression and employability essentially for PhDs. And manos arriba, how many are in the room who are actually doing a PhD? PhD students here, any stage. Wonderful, most of it. Any supervisors in the room? No, they would be welcome as well, because that's a good topic for them to be across as well. So tell your supervisors about this too. You can, well, I'll tell you a little bit about the two studies that are recently published and open access for you, that you can follow up in terms of details and more detailed reading. There are a couple of media articles on this research as well, if you want to just grab a 5-minute bite, because I know everyone's busy. And so I'll introduce those studies, I'll introduce myself, and then hopefully we'll have some time to just talk a little bit about general resources to get your PhD done. I prepared 2 slides for that as well. All right, so my name is LILIA. People ask me, how do you pronounce your name, where are you from? I was born in Kazakhstan, where I grew up in Russia and Germany. So I speak Russian, German, I'm learning Spanish, can do a bit of French. So if anyone's not comfortable in English, you can ask me questions in all those languages and we'll continue from there. I've done my PhD at Macquarie University in Australia after doing my teaching degree in Germany. And this job that I currently hold at the Sydney University Business School is my first academic appointment, and I was promoted 2 years ago, senior lecturer. Why I'm telling you this is a bit important, I guess, to the background of why I'm doing this research. All right. So there's a profile of me online, as all academics were pretty public, so you can find lots of information about me online, so I won't just spend too much time. But this is my beautiful campus. It's very Instagrammable. Lots of international students come to us just to take photos. They love our campus. And I'm not sure whether I have a pointer here. That is the business school. It's got a beautiful staircase. All the public figures, international guests come to our building and being shown around. So it's a really nice campus. We are a huge business school. We have, alone in the school, we have about 20,000 students. So it's a really big campus. What do I do? So more recently, I moved into researching employability and graduate skills and careers for ECRs, early career researchers. We call them ECRs. You'll hear me use that acronym a lot. But my PhD research that I graduated from 5 years ago was actually on the PhD experience. So yes, I did a PhD on the PhD. So I looked at how social networks, all the peer connections, your connections and relationships with your supervisors and other academic colleagues have affected the way students develop their research identities, how they become academics in that social environment. Because we all know, and you would have noticed by now as well, PhD is a very social experience. So you really need those connections for various reasons. It's not just support, it's not just emotional, mental support, it's for all different other support levels. I research PhD graduate identities, academic identities, professional identities, how PhD students develop as teachers. I looked at different dimensions of PhD support, social, economic, instrumental support, the role of supervisors, which still continues to be quite important, and in general, research identities of ECRs. Why we publish, how we publish, what's the role of external recognition there, and more recently, as I said, I looked into the skills needed to do a PhD, and then skills needed to progress to the next career. So from postdoc, senior lecturer, professor. In your case, in the Spanish case, it's slightly different labels, but the idea is the progression is fairly similar. All right, so, and this is where I introduced my first study. The first study looked at the skills that I needed to actually do a PhD. I'll try to skip through this a little bit faster because all of you are already in the PhD and you successfully made it here, but this is still, I think, really important for you to know because there might be skills that you will be expected to have developed by the end of your PhD studies before you transition into academic careers, and that might be taking you somewhere internationally. If you're mobile, you might be looking at academic jobs elsewhere. Before I proceed, how many in the room actually want an academic job? How many of you want to stay in academia? Right. And has it always been that way? Yes? Okay. Has it changed? Yes? Okay. And who wants to work in a non-academic sector, be it government, industry? Right. Oh, even a few more. Okay, that's interesting. All right. I'm not going to say good or bad, because this is not about it. It's about knowing the skills that are needed to progress into an academic career, but also skills that are transferable to non-academic contexts as well. Because there's one thing I want you to all take away from here today, and is that research that you do as part of your PhD research, of course, develops in transferable skills. You just need to learn how to sell them, yeah? To use that dirty word of business, I'm sorry. All right, so the research context for this study was, we know that PhD enrollments are rising across the globe pretty much. So there's a really competitive academic market. We don't have enough academic jobs to accommodate all of the PhD students. In the Australian context, at about half of the students will not have a stable academic job. And since the pandemic, that number is probably even higher. So a lot of the students are now reimagining and imagining different careers. And so far, the literature puts a big focus on the skills that PhD students develop as part of their PhD and take away from the PhD. So they measure that end of the PhD point. But so we missed that baseline. We don't actually know what PhD students are bringing in terms of skills to the PhD. So we wanted to address that gap. So what we had is a big data set of about 13,000 programs that were advertised, so PhD programs that were advertised on Euraccess. Hands up who knows or has heard of Euraccess? So this is definitely a platform for you to look at if you're looking to stay in academia and keep an eye out on the jobs that are advertised there. It's becoming more well, it's gaining visibility, and lots of universities will, public and private, will post jobs there. So definitely something to watch out for. We gathered data for 4 years, just before the pandemic, and the data focus was on the skill requirements in that job ad, the skill requirement sections. We also collected data on the discipline, country, year of posting, and we ran logistical regressions. You can imagine, when you analyze a data set like that, and you're looking at skill requirements, you need something to apply to help you categorize the skills that you're finding. So we applied the Eurodoc framework, transferable skills for early career researchers. It's a framework that was developed based on the research development framework developed by Vitae and the mindset framework. This might be familiar to some of you who are working and researching in the European space. So it's a well-established framework of skills. So we applied that to categorize the skills that we found in our data. There are, of course, limitations, and I want to be upfront about them. Limitations of job data research are, of course, just because someone's asking for you to have this and this and this skill doesn't mean that they actually will get it. If any of you have gone through a selection process, an interview, you will know that sometimes, you know, there's a candidate who's really convincing and great in some other things, and the panel decides, oh well, actually, let's employ this person, and then we can develop the skills that we need them to have, or you know, the expectations change in the process. So we cannot necessarily say what's asked is what gets the job, but it is a really important signal of the job market and the labor market in academia that shows us what is required. There might be some policy developments that would have led to particular skills being listed. So it's a really nice picture or a measure to see what is going on in the academic market, what is the sector looking for, and how can I prepare myself for it. But the limitations need to be kept in mind. So there were 2 questions for the analysis. What admission attributes are listed in PhD adverts? The reason we call them admission attributes, sounds like a mouthful, and not just skills, is because admission attributes do not only include skills, they also include qualifications, and really importantly, personal attributes. So things like, I want a candidate who's motivated, who is proactive, who is enthusiastic, and you know, a really good person to be around, right? Those kind of characteristics are, of course, common in job ads, and we wanted to capture them as well. So we stuck with the label admission attributes. We also we looked at the effect of discipline, country, and year of posting. Findings. There are 3 findings that I want to highlight to you. The first one, that qualifications and skills are required to do a PhD, of course. You know, to do a PhD, you need like a master's degree or an honors research or whatever other labels are used in this part of the world. So degree achievements naturally come out on top. But what's more important is what comes after. Communication skills are pretty much the next one up. It's super important for you to be able to already write well in Spanish or English, to communicate well, to present well, to perhaps even use social media depending on the type of research you do. So communication skills are absolutely key. And this is, if you have them already during your PhD, from my experience and from our research, we see that PhD students do really well in their PhDs if they communicate well in different formats to different audiences. Next comes research, and this here includes your research publications, your outputs, the actual research skills. Then there's interpersonal attributes, and I really want to highlight that one. Interpersonal attributes is all about how do you, with others, how do you negotiate, how are you interpersonally. All of this plays into the interpersonal attributes. Personal attributes, what are you like as a person? Then digital literacy, cognitive ability, which includes critical analytical thinking, mobility, fairly down low, but you will see that in the next study it was much more important. And then a little bit of teaching supervision. In this part of the world, you are probably doing some teaching as part of your PhD, right? Can you show me your hands? Yeah, everyone who's teaching? Not too many, okay. So when I presented this in Germany, almost everyone was teaching. When I presented this in Denmark, almost all of them were teaching. So that, of course, does something to your workload and the kinds of skills you need. In Germany, it's pretty common for PhD students to teach and to teach a lot. It's a similar situation in Australia, where I'm based, and universities are now restructuring their PhD programs to offer more teaching training for PhD students who want an academic career, realizing that teaching and supervision skills are really becoming important. So that's something you might want to consider doing if you are pursuing an academic career. In terms of country and discipline effect, this may not be surprising, but there are huge differences. So if you are in a particular discipline, especially a very niche discipline, it definitely pays off to look at the details. And there's one tool that we created for you where you can drill down. You can't really see it very well, but it's called rasgap.com. Rasgap like research gap. This tool was created to identify gaps in research when you compare different literatures, like practitioner literature and academic research. So that might also be a nice tool for you to look at. But there's also a link to a dashboard where you can drill down by discipline, by country, and you can see how the skills are spread in these different spheres. So yeah, significant differences between country and discipline, so keep that in mind and do your research before you move into those countries, should you be that mobile. And the third one is that PhD expectations are rising, and that's a reflection of the academic career, we think. Academic careers are becoming more and more competitive. They are packed with work. It's not an easy, cushy job as you once imagined it to be, so you really need to kind of understand that it can be a high-stress environment, and you need to assess for yourself whether this is where you want to be and how you deal with all the work-life expectations. And so the reason we say this here is because across the 4 years, independent of country discipline, we found there are more and more skills listed in the PhD program requirements, selection criteria, and also much more diversity. So different skills and also more skills. All right. The conclusion was for us that in terms of higher education policy, that means that we need to prepare our graduate students who want to do a PhD. So we need to do much more research-based training, knowledge, activities in the high school already before they actually get into the PhD, in the undergraduate degrees, but starting at high school, ideally. But the second conclusion was really to embed career development during the PhDs. Now, this is where it gets really heated sometimes and very political because, well, one problem with this suggestion is, of course, PhD programs are already packed. I know you're all super busy, right? Right? And so fitting in another thing on top of everything you do might be very overwhelming. But I want you to understand this is going to be the bread and butter of your academic progression. You will need to constantly develop or think about how you develop your career and be really proactive about it. Don't wait for the university to fix things for you. Go out there, take teaching appointments if that's the skill you need to develop. Ask to be on an academic board or some committee if there is a student representative looked for, because these opportunities are really great for you to understand what's going on in academia, what's going on in the higher education context. So you can then see how you fit in and where you can add value. All right, how are we going for time? All right. I think we're good. So I might maybe offer 1 or 2 minutes for questions on the first study before I proceed. Anything I need to clarify? Otherwise, I'll move on and I'll be available for questions later. All right, well, let's continue then. So the study 2 looks then into the academic progression. So the first study looks at what skills are needed for PhD. This now looked at what skills are needed for postdocs, research jobs that don't require that require a PhD degree, but are not necessarily a lecturer position. And then it looks at lecturer position, senior lecturer, full professor, so the full academic progression. Right? I'm a big fan of visual abstracts for all of my papers. The first thing I do, and I really enjoy doing that, I really suggest you do the same and you post it out there. Put it into social media, whatever social media you use. But you might notice at the end of this, that creating an online profile of you as an academic or a developing researcher is really important. So I usually tweet like a visual abstract of my paper. That's a 2-minute bite for anyone who's looking to see what's new. And as I said before, this research attracted quite a bit of media attention. And I think that's because academic careers are under the pump right now. There's a lot of debate. If you're following Nature Careers, the publication, they interviewed us on our research. The London School of Economics picked up this story as well and published an article about that. And if you follow academic news from outside of Europe, you would have heard how miserable PhDs are and how difficult it is for ECRs to find academic jobs in the Australian, New Zealand context. So there are lots of talks about this. And so we found this really relevant. For us, it was, for myself and my collaborator, we were both going through promotion at that time, so 2 years ago. I was applying for senior lecturer through the internal promotion process, and he was applying for the associate professor position. And we were really wondering, well, what skills does it actually take? And if we were to move into the European space of academia, is it the same? Is it different? We have lots of anecdotal evidence of, what it means to become a professor, but you don't really know, and we wanted to have a really data-informed approach. So again, we turned to Eurexis. We had all this data. We had about 40,000 academic jobs at all stages. And the way Eurexis defines the academic career is pretty similar how the theoretical literature on academic careers talks like. So R1 stage, there are 4 stages. R1 is the first stage researcher, which includes PhDs, postdocs. R2 is, late postdocs or ECRs, early career researchers, lecturers. R3, lecturers, associate professors. And R4, leading researchers, full professorship usually. And the question here is, what skills and qualifications, here we call them selection attributes because they form part of the selection criteria, matter most at each stage of the academic career, from PhD to full. I keep wanting to touch the laptop. So, as I said, the theoretical framework is pretty the Eurexis framework is pretty well-grounded in the theoretical literature on this. We use the career lifespan by Super as a theoretical model to inform how we analyze our data, and what's special about that framework is that it considers the country and discipline effect. And it generally looks at an academic career in these 4 stages that I showed you before. So, in terms of data, 40,000 job ads roundabout we had, and you can see how 2016 there were quite few, and that's because, that's because Eurexis was fairly new. I think it was introduced the year before, so it was just gaining in visibility, and more universities have started putting their jobs up there. We had a bit of a dip in 2020, guess why? And then 2021, there were again a bunch of jobs, and I think the number is rising. So, but the other interesting bit about the data, as you can see, maybe not surprising to you, but really good to know and to see the data behind this, R1, lots of positions, lots of PhD programs, lots of opportunities to develop, research training, but then going up towards professor, we have a bottleneck. Yeah, very few positions available. in terms of data, because we had about 60 countries covered, no, I'm not sure, 60 or 40, lots of countries covered, we, in disciplines as well, we wanted to just focus on some of them, the most represented ones that, countries, disciplines that have posted most jobs. We wanted to look at them to see what's actually going on at that level, to have a bit more of a detailed picture. Because remember before I said the country discipline difference is quite important here. So the analysis was focusing on really those countries and those disciplines and the changes between them. So now we look at the findings, and you might notice similar patterns but also differences. So degree achievements still on top, maybe not surprising because of course you need a PhD, especially for the earlier stages, but then going forward, your awards, any special recognition you would have gotten, you put that up on top, right, in your application for an academic position. So that counts still big time. Then the second category, research, your research publications, outputs, it's all about research performance, research metrics come out on top. And then you have mobility. This is a really interesting point here for academic progression. If you want to progress through academia quickly and you're mobile, you're in a very good spot. But most of us are not mobile, and it's a big price to pay sometimes to be mobile. Many of us have families, we have caring responsibilities, or we just simply don't want to leave our home country, and that's fine. You shouldn't have to have a fulfilling job. But we do notice that this is one factor that will get you ahead faster if you are mobile. And one thing to note on mobility is not just being able to move, it's also being able to speak a different language. Yeah. So, and being in the European context, you are already much better off than Australia, let me tell you. And this slide for a bit more. Teaching supervision has gained real importance here. As I said before, you are expected to teach and to teach lots, especially, well, in some countries, you teach a lot in the first academic roles. Going up to professor, you might be teaching less, but that's actually not the same in every country. In some countries, professors teach quite a lot as well. So we took that into account. And plus, higher education, massification, you probably all heard of it. We have more and more students who are admitted to do a degree and have open access or better accessibility to higher education, which is great. But someone needs to teach the masses, and that's where your skills would come in. Communication, still important. Interpersonal, personal attributes are absolutely key. You might be hearing, actually, that might be another point on the doctoral day agenda for next year. Networking, super important. Social media, networking, social media might be one way. You don't have to be on social media to network, but it's really important to build connections early. And that's all part of it. And then digital literacy, cognitive skills, of course, still really important, previous work experience. And a tiny little category there, enterprise, is coming into place because more and more research is expected to be applied. If you can commercialize your research, if you can create a patent, wonderful. If you're in that sort of space, you work in that space, we see that this is more and more required, and there's a real gain towards more senior roles, of course. So just to sum up the findings, as I said, mobility is absolutely key. Teaching gains importance towards professorate overall, but there are differences in countries. And senior academics really need to be not just involved in research and teaching, they do much more. They all of a sudden need to deal with curriculum issues, to attract money from external organizations, so do the fundraising work and external promotion of the university, that sort of work. That's something you would do in senior roles, of course. So career progression to higher levels usually involves moves from scholarly to more managerial tasks. But overall, what I want to say is career development is always part of your academic being. So, and really deserves a lot of attention here. For the real data nerds and those who are really interested in methodology or data visualization, I won't spend too much time on that, but basically the plus shows here what country or what discipline favors or is more likely to mention a certain skill, and the minus shows which is less likely to mention a certain skill. And again, for details on this, I recommend just looking at the paper. It's open access. Now, how is this useful for you? This is where I just want to sum up this whole research area and why it's important to keep an eye on these things. I think just understanding the general skill requirement if you want to move into academia is really important. Considering how academic jobs actually talk about it, especially in the English context, how do they label these things? How do they label the skills that you do and you develop? We have 11 of those. We have identified 11 categories of those, and you can use them as a tool to self-assess, to see how are you actually tracking, you know, like what skills do you think you have, where do you need to develop? It's a really nice way to kind of assess your compatibility, I guess, in the global academic market. And of course, again, cross-country, cross-discipline differences, I definitely urge you to look at those if you're looking into moving into a particular area across Europe. But many of you are looking at non-academic jobs, and I'm really glad you are here because you need to remember that all the skills that I mentioned, it's the same labels, it's the same kind of skill categories that any other job would mention as well. So there's a lot of talk on the literature saying that PhD students are not equipped for non-academic jobs. I don't subscribe to that. I think it's not true. But it's a matter of showing how your research really adds value to whatever career or job you're moving into if you move outside of a career. So it does require a bit of translation, a bit of communication skill, and a bit of perhaps interpersonal tact to really speak to the non-academic market when you apply for jobs. And again, I think I've said this many times before, but remember your PhD skills definitely prepare you for all sorts of diverse jobs. Now, before we finish, and how are we going for time? I think we're good. A few helpful resources. I've got 2 slides for you, and maybe that's something you just take a photo of, and you can go ahead and just figure and then check them out in your own time. It's a pretty full slide, but when I was a PhD student, I used many of these to get published, to write. Oh, I love this. I'd love to take a photo of you guys taking a photo. Well done. I thought they're useful. Many PhD students in Australia still use them all the time, and those are great resources, free, online, that will help you. Not just the PhD students in the room, by the way. I still use some of them today to get published. And I also published and wrote a few things on the PhD that are out there. By all means, if that's helpful, go ahead and check them out. And this is where I'll stop. And I thank you all. Muchas gracias. And I think I'm 5 minutes over time, or no, I'm still okay. Should I take questions now or move on? 5 minutes? Is that okay? Is that okay for you? Yeah. Everyone shy. If not, you can see it. Hi.
Thank you very much for your interesting talk and conference. Just by hearing you talking about the different skills required at different stages, it reminds me of the World Economic Forum 21st Century Leadership Skills. You haven't talked about leadership, and I think it's one of the main skills we all need, not just a PhD student or as a professional. Can you please develop or share your thoughts about how leadership is a great importance to sharp?
Excellent question. Leadership is such an, I don't want to say overused, but it's a much used word in any academic context, really, in all the work that you do. And For us, it was in the interpersonal category. That's where it's sitting. Yeah, just to be really concrete. But it's explained or it's defined in very different terms. So leading others, working, leading or directing teams, or project management, those kind of things. There are very different ways of doing that, but leadership is everywhere, and it is definitely a skill you need to start developing now. Yeah, good question.
¿Alguna pregunta más? También tiene español, así que si quieres entrar en español y os da vergüenza en inglés, ¿no? Pues yo creo que ya estaría.
Thank you.